Picture this. You're standing on stage in front of 200 colleagues, about to receive what you think is an employee recognition award, when your boss grabs the microphone and fires you instead. That's exactly what happened to me 3 months ago at Morrison Tech Solutions in downtown Seattle. But here's the twist my boss didn't see coming. He had no idea who my father really was. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Luna Robinson, and until recently, I was just another software developer in the Seattle tech scene. I'd been working at Morrison Tech Solutions for 2 years, building their customer relationship management platform from the ground up. The company specialized in cloud-based solutions for mid-size retailers, and honestly, I loved the work. There's something satisfying about writing clean code that actually helps small businesses manage their inventory and customer data more efficiently. Morrison Tech occupied 3 floors of a glass building in South Lake Union. The office had that typical startup vibe: exposed brick walls, ping pong tables nobody used, and a coffee bar that ran out of oat milk by 10 a.m. every morning. Our team of 40 developers, designers, and sales staff all reported to Marcus Chen, the company's chief operating officer and my direct boss. Marcus was one of those managers who seemed friendly on the surface, but had a mean streak that came out when he felt threatened. He was in his early 40s, always wore expensive suits that didn't quite fit his stocky frame, and had this habit of taking credit for other people's work during client presentations. I'd watched him do it to my colleagues plenty of times, but I kept my head down and focused on my projects. The problem started about 6 months before that infamous stage incident. Morrison Tech had been struggling financially. Their main investor had pulled out after some questionable accounting practices came to light, and suddenly the company was hemorrhaging money. Marcus became increasingly paranoid about job security, especially since rumors were circulating that the company might be sold or shut down entirely. During this stressful period, I made what turned out to be a crucial mistake. I started speaking up more in meetings. When Marcus would present my code solutions as his own ideas, I'd politely correct him. Actually, that was the approach I suggested in yesterday's email, I'd say, trying to keep my tone light. When he'd make technical promises to clients that our current system couldn't deliver, I'd quietly mention the limitations after the meeting. Marcus didn't appreciate my newfound assertiveness. He started excluding me from important project discussions, assigning my tasks to other developers, and making snide comments about team players during all-hands meetings. The writing was on the wall, but I figured I'd write it out until I could find another job. Then came the announcement about Morrison Tech's annual company meeting. Every year, they'd rent out the ballroom at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel downtown and bring together employees, clients, and investors for a presentation about the company's progress and future plans. This year felt different, though. There were whispers that major changes were coming. 2 weeks before the event, Marcus called me into his office. The space was decorated with motivational posters and photos of him shaking hands with various tech executives. He sat behind his oversized desk, fingers steepled, wearing what I'd learned to recognize as his serious business expression. "Luna, I need to talk to you about the annual meeting," he began. "We've decided to do something special this year. We're going to recognize one employee who's gone above and beyond, someone who really embodies our company values." I nodded, wondering where this was heading. Marcus had never shown particular interest in employee recognition before. "I've decided that person should be you," he continued. "We want to bring you up on stage during the presentation to acknowledge your contributions to the CRM platform." I was genuinely surprised. Despite our recent tensions, this seemed like an olive branch. Maybe Marcus had realized that pushing out good employees during a financial crisis wasn't the smartest move. "That's really thoughtful," I replied. "What would you need me to do?" "Nothing complicated. Just come up when I call your name, accept the recognition, maybe say a few words about teamwork and dedication, the usual corporate stuff." Looking back, I should have been suspicious of how vague he was being, but I was honestly just relieved that our working relationship seemed to be improving. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing some brief remarks about collaboration and innovation, figuring this could be a good opportunity to reset things with Marcus. The night of the annual meeting arrived, and the Fairmont's ballroom was packed. Round tables filled the space, each decorated with Morrison Tech's logo and fresh flowers. Clients sat mixed among employees, and I recognized several potential investors from the tech community. The atmosphere felt charged with anticipation. I'd chosen a navy blue blazer and dress pants, professional but not overly formal. Several colleagues complimented my outfit and mentioned they'd heard I was getting some kind of special recognition. The rumors had apparently spread through the office. Marcus took the stage around 7:30, looking confident in his charcoal gray suit. He launched into the standard corporate presentation, slide after slide about quarterly growth, customer satisfaction metrics, and future product development. The audience seemed engaged, especially when he talked about some major client wins from the past year. About halfway through his presentation, Marcus paused and his expression shifted. The friendly CEO smile disappeared, replaced by something harder. "Now, I want to address something important," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's sound system. "We've reached a point where Morrison Tech needs to make some difficult decisions about our team." The energy in the room immediately changed. Conversations at tables died out, and I felt my stomach drop. This didn't sound like employee recognition anymore. Sometimes you discover that people you trusted, people you believed were team players, are actually working against the company's interests, Marcus continued. "Tonight, I want to be transparent with all of you about a situation we've uncovered." He looked directly at me across the ballroom, and I felt 200 pairs of eyes follow his gaze. My heart started pounding as I realized this was going in a very different direction than I'd expected. "Luna Robinson, would you please come to the stage?" The words hit me like ice water. Around my table, colleagues looked confused and concerned. Sarah Martinez from the design team reached over and squeezed my arm. "Just go up there," she whispered. "Whatever this is, we'll figure it out." I stood on shaking legs and walked toward the stage, trying to maintain some dignity even though every instinct was telling me to run for the exit. The ballroom felt enormous, and the walk seemed to take forever. When I reached the stage steps, Marcus was waiting with that same hard expression. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced as I joined him at the podium, "I want you all to witness this moment because transparency is one of our core values here at Morrison Tech." That's when I knew I was about to be humiliated in front of everyone who mattered in my professional world. But I had no idea just how spectacular this was about to get. Standing on that stage next to Marcus, I could feel the weight of 200 stares. The ballroom had gone completely silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant clatter of dishes from the hotel kitchen. Marcus adjusted his tie and cleared his throat before continuing. "Over the past few months, we've discovered that Luna has been undermining team projects, questioning leadership decisions in front of clients, and creating a toxic work environment for her colleagues," he announced, his voice carrying that false concern that bad managers perfect over time. My mouth went dry. Every word was either a complete lie or a twisted version of me simply doing my job. The questioning leadership decisions was me pointing out when Marcus promised clients features that didn't exist. The undermining team projects was me correcting him when he took credit for my work. Furthermore, Marcus continued, clearly enjoying his moment, we found evidence that Luna has been sharing confidential company information with competitors, specifically details about our CRM platform architecture. That accusation hit me like a physical blow. I'd never shared any proprietary information with anyone, let alone competitors. I could see people in the audience whispering to each other, some looking shocked, others nodding as if this explained recent company struggles. "Marcus, that's not true," I managed to say, my voice barely carrying through the microphone. "I've never." He held up a hand to cut me off. "We have email records, Luna, screenshots of conversations with representatives from TechFlow Solutions and DataSync Corp. Do you want to deny those too?" TechFlow and DataSync were Morrison Tech's biggest competitors in the Seattle market. I'd never even spoken to anyone from either company, much less shared confidential information. But Marcus said it with such conviction that I could see doubt creeping into the faces of people who'd worked with me for 2 years. Those emails don't exist because I never sent them, I said. You're making this up. A murmur went through the crowd. Some people looked uncomfortable with the public nature of this confrontation, but others seemed convinced by Marcus's performance. He'd always been good at presentations, and now he was using those skills to destroy my reputation. Luna, please don't make this harder than it needs to be, Marcus said, his tone shifting to fake sympathy. We've already terminated your employment, effective immediately. Security will escort you out after this presentation concludes. The humiliation was complete. Not only was I being fired, but Marcus had chosen the most public possible venue to do it. Every client, every investor, every colleague would remember this moment. My career in Seattle's tight-knit tech community was essentially over. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. But as I stood there processing the magnitude of what was happening, something strange occurred. A man in an expensive navy suit stood up from one of the front tables. He was tall, probably in his late 50s, with graying hair and the kind of presence that made people pay attention. I didn't recognize him, but several people in the audience clearly did, based on their reactions. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice calm but carrying easily through the ballroom. "I think there might be some confusion here." Marcus looked annoyed at the interruption. "Sir, this is a private company matter. If you could please—" "My name is David Hartwell," the man continued, ignoring Marcus's protest. "I'm the new majority owner of Morrison Tech Solutions as of this morning. The acquisition paperwork was finalized at 2 p.m. today." The ballroom erupted in shocked whispers. Marcus's face went white, then red, then back to white. He clearly had no idea this was coming, which meant the sale had been kept secret from upper management until the last possible moment. My brain was struggling to process this new information. Morrison Tech had been sold to David Hartwell, and he'd chosen tonight to announce it? "Now," David continued, walking slowly toward the stage, "I've been sitting here listening to you publicly humiliate an employee based on what I can only assume are fabricated accusations, since my due diligence team found no evidence of any data breaches or information leaks during their investigation." Marcus grabbed the microphone with both hands, his knuckles white. "Mr. Hartwell, I appreciate your concern, but Luna Robinson has been a problematic employee for months. We have documentation." "Do you?" David was now at the base of the stage steps. "Because my team reviewed all personnel files as part of the acquisition process. Luna Robinson's file shows consistently excellent performance reviews, no disciplinary actions, and several commendations from clients for her work on the CRM platform." He climbed the steps and joined us on stage. Up close, I could see he had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and there was something familiar about his features that I couldn't quite place. "In fact," David continued, now speaking directly to the audience, "Miss Robinson's code architecture is one of the primary reasons I decided to acquire Morrison Tech. Her work on the customer relationship management system is genuinely innovative." I felt like I was in some kind of fever dream. 5 minutes ago, I was being publicly destroyed. Now the new owner of the company was defending my work to a room full of industry professionals. Marcus was visibly sweating now. "Mr. Hartwell, you don't understand the full situation. Luna has been insubordinate, questioning my decisions." "You mean she's been doing her job?" David's tone remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "Because from what I can see in the project records, every time she questioned your decisions, she was correct. The client presentation where she pointed out that the real-time analytics feature wasn't ready for deployment, she saved you from promising something you couldn't deliver. The meeting where she mentioned the security vulnerabilities in the user authentication system, she prevented a potential data breach." The audience was completely riveted now. This had turned from a routine firing into a corporate drama that nobody had expected. I could see phones coming out as people started recording. "Mr. Chen," David continued, addressing Marcus directly, "effective immediately, your employment with Morrison Tech Solutions is terminated. Please clear out your office by tomorrow morning."
The reversal was so sudden and complete that several people in the audience actually gasped. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, then seemed to realize he had no ground to stand on. The new owner had just fired him in front of the same crowd he'd tried to humiliate me in front of. "This is ridiculous," Marcus finally managed. "You can't just—" "I can, and I am," David replied. "Security will escort you out this evening." As if on cue, 2 hotel security guards appeared at the side of the stage. Marcus looked around desperately, perhaps hoping for support from the audience, but found only curious stares and a few satisfied expressions from employees who'd apparently been waiting for this moment for a long time. He stalked off the stage without another word. The ballroom buzzed with conversation as people processed what they'd just witnessed. David turned to me with what I could swear was an apologetic smile. "Miss Robinson, I'm sorry you had to experience that. It was unprofessional and completely unnecessary." "Thank you," I managed to say, still not entirely sure this was really happening. "I don't understand, though. Why did you defend me? You don't even know me." David's smile became warmer, and suddenly that familiar quality about his features clicked into place. The shape of his eyes, the way he tilted his head slightly when thinking, I'd seen those expressions in the mirror my entire life. "Actually, Luna," he said quietly, speaking just to me while the audience continued their animated discussions, "I know you better than you think." The words hung in the air between us as the ballroom continued buzzing with shocked conversations about Marcus's dramatic exit. David Hartwell stood there looking at me with an expression that was part nervous, part hopeful, and entirely familiar in a way that made my chest tight. "What do you mean you know me?" I asked, though part of me was already putting together pieces I'd been avoiding my whole life. David glanced at the audience, then back at me. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. Would you mind joining me in the hotel's business center after I wrap up here?" I nodded, still too stunned to form coherent thoughts. David turned back to the microphone and addressed the crowd with the kind of natural authority that comes from years of running companies. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to what should have been a celebration of Morrison Tech's achievements. Let me briefly outline my vision for the company's future, then we can get back to the excellent dinner the hotel has prepared."
As David launched into an impromptu presentation about his plans for Morrison Tech, expanding the development team, investing in new technologies, maintaining the company culture, I slipped off the stage and made my way to an empty table in the back. My legs felt unsteady, and I needed a moment to process everything that had just happened. Sarah Martinez from the design team found me there a few minutes later, sliding into the chair beside me with wide eyes. "Luna, what the hell just happened up there?" she whispered. "One minute Marcus is destroying your career, the next minute some mystery billionaire is firing him and defending you like your family or something." The word family hit me like a physical blow. I'd been adopted as a baby by Jennifer and Robert Robinson, 2 wonderful people who'd given me every opportunity in life. They'd always been open about the adoption, telling me that my birth parents were young and unable to care for a child. My birth father, they'd said, was a college student who'd left Seattle before I was born and never knew I existed. His last name, according to the limited information in my adoption records, was Hartwell. "Sarah, I think I need some air," I managed to say. "Can you cover for me if anyone asks where I went?" She squeezed my arm. "Of course. Are you okay, though? You look like you've seen a ghost." I wasn't okay. I felt like my entire world had just shifted on its axis. But I needed to have this conversation with David Hartwell before I could even begin to process what it might mean. The business center was on the hotel's mezzanine level, a quiet space with leather chairs and mahogany tables that was mercifully empty at this hour. David was already there when I arrived, having somehow managed to extract himself from the ballroom full of people who undoubtedly wanted to talk to the new owner. He'd loosened his tie and was staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at Elliott Bay, where ferries moved like slow-motion fireflies across the dark water. When he heard me enter, he turned around, and I could see the same nervous energy I was feeling reflected in his expression. "Luna, please sit down," he said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs. "I know this is overwhelming." I sat, but remained perched on the edge of the chair, ready to bolt if this conversation went in a direction I couldn't handle. Are you my birth father? The directness of the question seemed to surprise him, but he nodded slowly. Yes, though I didn't know you existed until 6 months ago. 6 months ago? Right around the time Marcus had started my life difficult, when Morrison Tech's financial problems had become public knowledge. The timing couldn't be coincidental. How did you find out? I asked. David sat down across from me, running a hand through his graying hair. I hired a private investigator to help me locate some old college friends for a reunion. Stupid, really. I could have just used Facebook like everyone else. But the investigator was thorough, and during his research, he discovered records indicating I had a daughter who'd been placed for adoption in 1995. My birth year! The pieces were clicking into place with terrifying precision. Your birth mother was Rachel Morrison, he continued. We dated during my senior year at University of Washington. She was brilliant, studying biochemistry, planning to go to graduate school. When she got pregnant, we were both terrified. I was about to graduate with massive student loans and a job offer in Silicon Valley that barely paid enough to cover rent. Rachel was facing the choice between raising a child and pursuing her dream of becoming a research scientist. I'd never heard my birth mother's name before. The Robinsons had tried to find information over the years, but the adoption had been handled through a private agency that valued confidentiality above all else. We made the decision together to place you for adoption, David said. It was the hardest thing either of us had ever done, but we wanted you to have opportunities we couldn't provide. Rachel insisted on a closed adoption. She said it would be easier for everyone to move forward with their lives. So you left for Silicon Valley and never looked back? There was more bitterness in my voice than I'd intended, but 27 years of wondering will do that to you. David's expression tightened. I thought about you every day, Luna. Every birthday, every Christmas, every time I achieved something in my career, I wondered about the daughter I'd given up. But Rachel made me promise never to try to find you. She said it wouldn't be fair to disrupt the life you'd built with your adoptive family. Then why now? Why did you hire the investigator? Because Rachel died last year, he said quietly. Cancer. She reached out to me near the end, said she'd been following your career from a distance and was proud of the person you'd become. She released me from my promise and gave me permission to try to find you if I wanted to. The revelation hit me like a wave. My birth mother had been watching my career, following my progress in the tech industry, and now she was gone, and I'd never have the chance to meet her or thank her for the sacrifice she'd made. She knew I worked at Morrison Tech? I asked. David nodded. She kept track of both of us, actually. She knew I'd built my own company and knew about your work as a developer. When Morrison Tech started having financial troubles, she asked me to keep an eye on the situation. She was worried about your job security. That explained how he'd known so much about my work, about the personnel files and project records. He hadn't just acquired Morrison Tech as a business investment. He'd bought it to protect his daughter's career. You bought an entire company because you were worried about my job? The magnitude of it was almost incomprehensible. I bought a company that was undervalued and had excellent technology, primarily developed by a brilliant software engineer who happened to be my daughter, he corrected with a small smile. The fact that it solved your employment situation was a bonus. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the lights of West Seattle twinkle across the water. I was trying to absorb the fact that I'd gone from unemployed and humiliated to having a billionaire father and a secure job in the span of 30 minutes. This is a lot to process, I finally said. I know, and I don't want you to feel any pressure to have a relationship with me if that's not what you want. I just couldn't stand by and watch that idiot destroy your career when I had the power to prevent it. The casual way he referred to Marcus as that idiot made me laugh despite everything. He really was terrible, wasn't he? Terrible doesn't begin to cover it. My due diligence team found evidence that he'd been inflating his performance metrics, taking credit for other people's work, and basically driving away every competent employee the company had. You weren't the first person he tried to scapegoat. That revelation made me feel vindicated, but also sad for my former colleagues who'd suffered under Marcus's management. What happens to everyone else, the other employees? They keep their jobs, get better management, and hopefully start enjoying their work again, David said. I'm planning to promote internally for Marcus's replacement. Actually, I was hoping you might be interested in leading the CRM development team. A promotion from unemployed to team leader in one evening. My head was spinning with the speed of these changes. David, I said, testing out his name, I need time to think about all of this. The job, the relationship, everything. Of course, take all the time you need. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. My direct number is on there. Call me when you're ready to talk, even if it's just to tell me you want nothing to do with me. I took the card, noting that it was surprisingly simple, just his name, phone number, and email address. No corporate titles or logos. There's one more thing, he said as I stood to leave. Your birth mother wanted you to have something. He handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a pendant shaped like a DNA double helix, a reference to Rachel's career in biochemistry. She bought this when you were born, David explained. She always hoped that someday she'd be able to give it to you herself. I held the necklace carefully, feeling the weight of all the love and loss it represented. Somewhere out there, a woman I'd never known had been thinking about me, worrying about me, being proud of my accomplishments from afar. Thank you, I whispered, not trusting my voice to handle anything louder. As I walked back through the hotel lobby, I could hear the sounds of the Morrison Tech celebration continuing in the ballroom. My colleagues were probably still processing the evening's dramatic events, wondering what the new ownership would mean for their futures. But for the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: hope. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in what used to be Marcus's corner office, watching the Seattle skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows while reviewing code architecture plans for Morrison Tech's next major update. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same office where Marcus had plotted my professional destruction was now my workspace as the new director of platform development. The transition hadn't been entirely smooth. Some colleagues treated me differently once word spread about my connection to David, whispering about nepotism and wondering if my promotion was deserved. Others, particularly those who'd suffered under Marcus's management, were genuinely excited about the changes happening throughout the company. Sarah Martinez knocked on my office door, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the kind of grin that meant she had gossip to share. "You're going to love this," she said, settling into one of the chairs across from my desk. "I just heard from Jenny in HR about what happened to Marcus after he got fired." I looked up from my laptop, curious despite myself. "Please tell me he didn't land somewhere better than here." "Oh, it's so much worse than that," Sarah laughed. "Apparently, word spread through the Seattle tech community about what he did that night. You know how everyone talks in this industry. Well, Marcus has been interviewing at companies all over the city, and every single one has passed on him." "Really? Really?" Jenny heard from her friend at DataSync Corp that Marcus interviewed there last week. The hiring manager actually asked him to explain what happened at Morrison Tech's annual meeting. When Marcus tried to spin it as a personnel dispute, the interviewer pulled out his phone and showed him a video someone had posted on LinkedIn. The video? I'd seen it myself, a shaky recording someone had taken of Marcus firing me on stage, followed by David's intervention and Marcus's own termination. It had gone viral in Seattle's tech circles, racking up thousands of views and hundreds of comments, most of them critical of Marcus's unprofessional behavior. "The best part," Sarah continued, "is that 3 former Morrison Tech employees have started sharing their own stories about working under Marcus. Remember Jake Patterson from the QA team who quit 6 months ago? He posted a detailed account of how Marcus tried to blame him for a security vulnerability that Marcus himself had insisted on implementing." I did remember Jake. He'd been one of our best quality assurance engineers, meticulous and dedicated. His sudden departure had surprised everyone, but now it made perfect sense. What about the accusations Marcus made against me that night? The supposed emails to competitors? Sarah's expression darkened. That's the really messed up part. David's security team did a full investigation and found that Marcus had actually been in contact with TechFlow Solutions about potentially selling them our client database.
The emails he claimed were from you? They were his, with the headers modified to make it look like they came from your account.
The revelation was stunning, but not entirely surprising. Marcus had always been willing to throw others under the bus to save himself. Manufacturing evidence of my supposed betrayal was just an extreme version of his usual tactics. Is David pressing charges? I don't know, but apparently TechFlow is. They're claiming Marcus approached them under false pretenses, promising information he didn't actually have access to. Their legal team is not happy about being dragged into corporate espionage accusations. My desk phone rang before I could respond. The caller ID showed David's direct line. Luna, do you have a few minutes to chat? His voice carried the warm tone I'd grown accustomed to over the past few weeks. We'd been taking things slowly, having lunch once a week, and talking regularly about both business and personal matters. Of course, Sarah was just updating me on Marcus's job search difficulties. Ah yes, the Seattle tech community's efficient gossip network strikes again. Actually, that's partly why I'm calling. I wanted to give you a heads up that Marcus has hired a lawyer and is threatening to sue both you and the company for wrongful termination and defamation. I felt my stomach drop. What exactly is he claiming? The usual vindictive nonsense. He's alleging that you conspired with me to get him fired, that the whole acquisition was orchestrated specifically to target him, and that his reputation has been unfairly damaged. Sarah was listening intently, her eyes wide with concern. I put the call on speaker so she could hear David's response. The good news is that his case has no merit whatsoever, David continued. Our legal team reviewed everything, and we have documentation proving that the acquisition discussions began before I even knew Marcus existed. Plus, his own modified emails are going to be Exhibit A in demonstrating his willingness to fabricate evidence. So we're not worried? Not even a little bit. In fact, our lawyers are preparing a countersuit for the corporate espionage attempt and defamation of your character. Marcus painted himself into a corner with his behavior that night, and now he's trying to litigate his way out of the consequences. After ending the call, Sarah and I sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The view from the office window showed Elliott Bay sparkling in the afternoon sunlight, with ferries crossing back and forth like they did every day, oblivious to the human dramas playing out in the glass towers surrounding them. You know what the craziest part of all this is? Sarah said finally. What's that? 6 months ago, you were just another developer trying to do good work while dealing with a terrible boss. Now you're running a development team, you've discovered your birth father is a tech mogul, and you're probably about to become the subject of a very public lawsuit. She was right. My life had transformed so completely that sometimes I felt like I was living someone else's story. But the strange thing was how natural it all felt now. The promotion had initially intimidated me, but leading a team turned out to be a logical extension of the collaborative approach I'd always taken to coding. The relationship with David was developing slowly but genuinely. He was patient, funny, and genuinely interested in getting to know the person I'd become rather than trying to make up for lost time. There's something else, I said, pulling Rachel's DNA necklace from beneath my shirt. I'd taken to wearing it every day, finding comfort in the connection to the mother I'd never known. David gave me access to some of Rachel's personal papers. She kept a journal during her pregnancy, and he thought I might want to read it. Sarah leaned forward, intrigued. Are you going to? I already did, all of it in one sitting last weekend. The memory of that emotional marathon reading session was still fresh. Sarah, she wrote about me every day, her hopes for my future, her fears about whether she was making the right decision, her certainty that David would be a good father someday, even though they were both too young at the time. That must have been incredible to read. It was, but also heartbreaking. She documented every doctor's appointment, every moment she felt me move, every ultrasound picture. And then the final entry, written the day after I was born, where she talked about holding me for 2 hours before the adoption agency came to take me to the Robinsons. I cried for 3 hours after reading that final entry. Rachel had loved me completely during the short time we'd had together, and then she'd spent the rest of her life loving me from a distance.
The journal also explained something that had been bothering me, I continued, how David knew so much about Morrison Tech's internal problems. Rachel had been following my career closely, and she'd noticed when the company started struggling financially. She actually suggested that David consider acquiring it as both an investment opportunity and a way to protect my job. So your birth mother orchestrated this whole thing. In a way, yes. She saw an opportunity to bring her daughter and the father of her child together while solving a business problem. It was elegant, really, very much the kind of strategic thinking you'd expect from a research scientist. My computer chimed with a new email notification. The sender was Marcus Chen, and the subject line read, "Final warning." Sarah noticed my expression change as I read the message. "What is it?" "Marcus being Marcus," I said, forwarding her the email. "He's demanding that I publicly admit to orchestrating his termination, or else he'll expose the truth about my relationship with David in his lawsuit." Sarah read the email, her expression shifting from concern to anger. He's threatening to make your personal family situation part of a public legal battle? That's disgusting. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from David. "Check the Seattle Tech Journal website. Marcus just made a strategic error." I pulled up the website on my laptop. The headline read, "Former Morrison Tech COO claims conspiracy in public meltdown." The article detailed Marcus's version of events, painting himself as the victim of an elaborate scheme involving corporate espionage, family connections, and coordinated character assassination.
But the comments section was brutal. Person after person in the Seattle tech community was sharing their own negative experiences with Marcus, creating a public record of his unprofessional behavior that stretched back years. The article had backfired spectacularly. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to one particular comment. "That's Rebecca Chen from Innovative Systems. She's saying Marcus tried to poach 3 of their developers last year by offering them confidential information about Morrison Tech's client contracts." The dominoes were falling. By trying to control the narrative through media manipulation, Marcus had inadvertently created a platform for everyone he'd wronged over the years to share their stories. My desk phone rang again. This time it was Jennifer Robinson, my adoptive mother. "Luna, honey, your father and I just saw the news article online. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom. It's just Marcus being vindictive because his career imploded." "We're proud of how you've handled this whole situation," she said, "and we want you to know that we're excited about you connecting with David. We've always hoped you'd have the opportunity to know your birth parents if you wanted to." The support from the Robinsons had been unwavering throughout this entire experience. Rather than feeling threatened by David's presence in my life, they'd embraced the expansion of our family with characteristic generosity. "Thanks, Mom. That means everything to me." After ending the call, I looked out at the Seattle skyline again, thinking about how much had changed since that humiliating night 3 weeks ago. Marcus had intended to destroy my career and reputation in the most public way possible. Instead, his actions had led to me finding my birth father, advancing my career, and discovering strengths I didn't know I possessed. The lawsuit would probably drag on for months, and there would likely be more unpleasant surprises ahead. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing work I loved, surrounded by people who valued my contributions. Sometimes, the worst moments in our lives turn out to be the catalysts for the best changes we never saw coming. 6 months after that life-changing night at the Fairmont Olympic, I found myself standing in a very different kind of ballroom. This time, it was the Grand Hall at the Seattle Convention Center, packed with over 500 of the Pacific Northwest's most influential tech leaders for the annual Innovation Awards ceremony. Morrison Tech had been nominated for Best Platform Development, thanks to our revolutionary CRM system update that had launched 3 months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me as I adjusted my emerald green dress and checked my speech notes one final time. The last time I'd been on a stage in front of the tech community, I was being publicly humiliated and fired. Tonight, I was potentially about to accept an industry award for the same work Marcus had tried to destroy me over. David appeared beside me, looking distinguished in his black tuxedo. Over the past 6 months, our relationship had evolved from tentative reconnection to genuine father-daughter bond. He'd been patient, never pushing for more than I was comfortable with, and I'd gradually learned to trust that his interest in my life was authentic rather than guilt-driven. "Nervous?" he asked, straightening his bow tie. "Surprisingly, no," I replied, and realized it was true. After everything that's happened, giving a speech about software development feels pretty manageable. The ceremony began with the typical industry networking hour, followed by dinner and presentations about various technological innovations. I spotted several familiar faces from that night at the Fairmont, including some former Morrison Tech clients who had specifically requested to continue working with our company after the ownership change. What I didn't expect to see was Marcus Chen. He was standing near the bar, looking uncomfortable in an ill-fitting rental tuxedo, nursing what appeared to be his third drink of the evening. His lawsuit against Morrison Tech and me had been dismissed 2 months earlier, with the judge calling his claims frivolous and without merit. The countersuit for defamation and attempted corporate espionage was still pending, but Marcus's legal troubles extended far beyond our case now. "Is that who I think it is?" David had followed my gaze across the room. "Unfortunately, yes. What is he even doing here?" "Probably crashing the event," David said. "I heard through the grapevine that he's been trying to start his own consulting firm, but no one will work with him. This is likely a desperate networking attempt." Before I could respond, Sarah Martinez appeared at my elbow, looking stunning in a navy blue cocktail dress. She'd been promoted to lead UX designer after our team reorganization and had become one of my closest collaborators in developing the new platform features. "Luna, you need to see this," she said, holding up her phone with barely contained excitement. "The Seattle Business Journal just published their investigative piece about Marcus. It's absolutely devastating." I took her phone and quickly scanned the article headline, "The Rise and Fall of a Tech Tyrant, How Marcus Chen's Reign of Terror Finally Ended." The piece was a comprehensive exposé featuring interviews with over a dozen former colleagues, clients, and employees who had suffered under Marcus's management over the years. "They have quotes from people at 3 different companies," Sarah continued. "Apparently, the pattern went back almost a decade. He'd join a company, initially perform well, then gradually start taking credit for other people's work while systematically undermining anyone who threatened his position." The article included a particularly damning section about his time at a startup called CloudReach Solutions, where he'd apparently driven away their entire development team by creating such a toxic work environment that people preferred unemployment to working under him. "Look at this part," David said, reading over my shoulder. "They found evidence that he'd been inflating performance metrics at CloudReach too, and that the company's eventual bankruptcy was partly due to promises he'd made to clients about capabilities that didn't exist." "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats for the awards presentation," announced the ceremony's host, a prominent venture capitalist whose voice carried easily through the ballroom's sound system. We made our way to Morrison Tech's reserved table near the front of the room. I noticed Marcus had managed to find a seat at a table in the back, probably by claiming to be someone's guest. His presence felt like a dark cloud on what should have been a celebratory evening, but I was determined not to let him ruin this moment. The first few awards were for smaller categories: Best Mobile App, Most Innovative Startup, Outstanding Customer Service Platform. Each winner gave brief acceptance speeches about collaboration, innovation, and the importance of putting users first. The themes felt particularly meaningful given everything our team had been through. Finally, the host reached our category. The award for Best Platform Development recognizes a company that has created technology solutions that fundamentally improve how businesses operate. This year's nominees have demonstrated exceptional technical innovation, user experience design, and measurable impact on their client success. As he read through the nominees, I felt my heart rate pick up despite my earlier confidence. Morrison Tech was competing against some genuinely impressive companies, including a San Francisco firm that had developed AI-powered inventory management systems and a Portland startup that specialized in blockchain-based supply chain tracking.
The winner of this year's Best Platform Development Award is Morrison Tech Solutions for their revolutionary CRM platform that has increased client efficiency by an average of 340% while reducing operational costs by 60%. The ballroom erupted in applause as our table stood up in celebration. David was beaming with pride, Sarah was practically bouncing with excitement, and I felt a surge of vindication that was almost overwhelming. This was the same platform Marcus had tried to claim credit for, the same work he'd dismissed as basic database management when talking to clients. I made my way to the stage accepting congratulations from colleagues and competitors alike. When I reached the podium and looked out at the audience, I could see Marcus at his table in the back, his expression a mixture as anger and what might have been regret. "Thank you so much for this incredible honor," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's sound system. This platform represents the culmination of 2 years of collaborative development by an amazing team of engineers, designers, and project managers who believed that technology should make people's jobs easier, not more complicated. I talked about the specific innovations we'd implemented, the intuitive user interface that required minimal training, the predictive analytics that helped businesses anticipate customer needs, and the seamless integration capabilities that eliminated the data silos that plagued most companies. But beyond the technical achievements, this project taught me something crucial about leadership and workplace culture. The best innovations come from environments where people feel safe to take risks, to challenge assumptions, and to speak truth to power when necessary. They come from teams where everyone's contributions are valued and where success is measured by collective achievement rather than individual advancement. I could see David nodding approvingly from our table, and several people in the audience were leaning forward, clearly engaged with the message. 6 months ago, I learned firsthand how destructive it can be when those values are absent from an organization. When leaders prioritize their own advancement over their team's well-being, when they take credit for others' work and create cultures of fear rather than collaboration, innovation suffers and talented people leave. There was a murmur of recognition through the audience. The tech community was small enough that most people knew the general outline of what had happened at Morrison Tech, though they might not have known all the details. Tonight, I want to dedicate this award to everyone who has ever had their contributions minimized, their ideas stolen, or their character attacked by someone in a position of power. Your work matters, your innovations matter, and no one has the right to diminish your achievements to elevate themselves. The applause was thunderous. I could see people at tables throughout the ballroom standing up, and several individuals were wiping away tears. Apparently, my experience with Marcus had resonated with more people than I'd realized. As I left the stage with the award in hand, I noticed that Marcus's table was empty. He'd apparently decided to make an early exit rather than face the continued celebration of work he'd tried to destroy. Back at our table, David wrapped me in a proud hug. "That was an incredible speech, Luna. Your birth mother would have been so proud to see you up there tonight." Sarah was practically vibrating with excitement. "Did you see the live tweets from the audience? People are sharing quotes from your speech with hashtags about toxic workplace culture and supporting colleagues. This is going viral in the best possible way." Over the next hour, as the ceremony concluded and the networking portion began, I was approached by dozens of people sharing their own stories about difficult managers, workplace bullying, and the importance of standing up for what's right. Several companies expressed interest in partnering with Morrison Tech on future projects, specifically citing our commitment to ethical leadership. Near the end of the evening, I was surprised to receive a text from an unknown number. "Congratulations on your award. You deserved it more than I ever admitted. M." It took me a moment to realize the message was from Marcus. I showed it to David and Sarah, both of whom looked skeptical. "Do you think he's actually feeling remorse?" Sarah asked.
More likely, he's trying to rehabilitate his image, David replied. But even if it's genuine, it doesn't undo the damage he caused to you and others. I thought about responding, then decided against it. Marcus's acknowledgement felt like too little, too late. The real validation had come from the team that built the platform, the clients who benefited from it, and the industry that had recognized its value. As we walked out of the convention center into the cool Seattle night, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in less than a year. I'd gone from being an individual contributor trying to survive under toxic management to leading a development team, reconnecting with my birth father, and becoming a voice for positive workplace culture in the tech industry. The award in my hands represented more than technical achievement. It was proof that good work, ethical leadership, and collaborative innovation could triumph over petty politics and personal vendettas. Tomorrow, there will be new challenges, new projects, and new opportunities to build something meaningful. But tonight, standing between my birth father and my closest colleague, I felt like I was finally living the life I was meant to have. 1 year after the Innovation Awards ceremony, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon, staring at an email that would change everything again. The message was from Dr. Elizabeth Warren, not the senator, but a renowned organizational psychologist at Stanford University who had been following the aftermath of my award speech through academic circles. Ms. Robinson, the email read, I've been researching workplace psychological safety and toxic leadership patterns in the tech industry. Your experience at Morrison Tech, combined with your subsequent advocacy work, represents a fascinating case study in organizational transformation and resilience. Would you be interested in collaborating on a research project that could help other companies identify and address similar issues? The past year had been a whirlwind of unexpected opportunities. My Innovation Awards speech had indeed gone viral, spawning countless discussions about workplace culture in tech forums, LinkedIn posts, and industry publications. More surprisingly, it had led to speaking engagements at conferences across the country, where I shared strategies for creating psychologically safe work environments and supporting colleagues facing workplace bullying. Morrison Tech had thrived under the cultural changes David and I had implemented. Employee satisfaction scores had increased by 85%, voluntary turnover had dropped to nearly zero, and our client retention rate was approaching 98%. The company had expanded to 120 employees across 3 offices, and we'd been featured in Harvard Business Review as an example of how leadership transitions could revitalize struggling organizations. But perhaps the most unexpected development was what had happened to Marcus Chen. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Turn on Channel 7 News now. I pulled up the local news live stream on my laptop and was shocked to see Marcus being led away from a downtown Seattle office building in handcuffs. The reporter was explaining that he'd been arrested for embezzling funds from his consulting clients and attempting to sell proprietary software code that didn't belong to him. The story unfolded over the next several hours through a series of news reports and social media posts. After his consulting firm had failed to attract legitimate clients, Marcus had apparently resorted to increasingly desperate measures. He'd convinced 3 small businesses to pay him for custom software solutions that were actually modified versions of code he'd stolen from his previous employers, including Morrison Tech. When one of his clients discovered that their expensive proprietary system was nearly identical to software being used by their competitor, they launched an investigation that uncovered Marcus's fraudulent practices. The evidence included forged contracts, fake testimonials, and a paper trail showing he'd been systematically overcharging clients for services he was outsourcing to freelancers at a fraction of the cost. David called me within minutes of the news breaking. I just heard about Marcus. Are you okay? I'm fine, I said, surprised to realize it was true. Actually, I feel more relieved than anything else. It validates everything we suspected about his character. The prosecutors are saying this could be connected to similar schemes in other cities. They think he's been operating this way for years, possibly even before he came to Morrison Tech. That revelation recontextualized everything. Marcus hadn't just been a bad manager, he'd been a career criminal who happened to work in corporate environments. His behavior toward me and others wasn't just professional misconduct, it was part of a larger pattern of exploitation and fraud. There's something else, David continued. The FBI wants to interview you as part of their investigation. Apparently, some of the code Marcus was selling to clients included modifications you'd made to our CRM platform. Over the next few weeks, I found myself drawn into a federal investigation that stretched back over 5 years, involving victims in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, and Austin. Marcus had been remarkably consistent in his methods.
join a company, gain access to proprietary systems, steal code and client information, then use that stolen material to build his own competing services after leaving. The interviews with federal agents were surreal. They showed me evidence of Marcus's schemes that was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. He maintained detailed files on colleagues he'd viewed as threats, including psychological profiles and strategies for undermining their credibility. My own file was 3 inches thick and included screenshots of my social media posts, analysis of my work patterns, and even notes about my personal relationships. Ms. Robinson, the email read, based on this documentation, it appears Mr. Chen viewed you as his primary obstacle to advancing within Morrison Tech. He spent considerable time planning how to discredit you and position himself as indispensable to the company. The systematic nature of Marcus's targeting was both validating and disturbing. It confirmed that my instincts about his behavior had been correct, but it also revealed how calculated his cruelty had been. The public firing wasn't a moment of poor judgment. It was the culmination of months of strategic planning to destroy my career. As the investigation progressed, more victims came forward. Jenny Nakamura, a former colleague from Marcus's time at CloudReach Solutions, reached out to me directly after seeing news coverage of the case. "Luna, I can't tell you how grateful I am that someone finally stood up to him," she said during our video call. "He did to me exactly what he tried to do to you, took credit for my work, then sabotaged my projects when I started pushing back."
Jenny's story was heartbreakingly familiar. Marcus had convinced CloudReach's leadership that she was difficult to work with and prone to making errors. Then he'd quietly fixed the problems he'd created and positioned himself as the hero who'd saved the company from her mistakes. "The worst part was how isolated I felt," Jenny continued. "Marcus was so good at making it seem like I was the problem that I started questioning my own perception of what was happening." Her words resonated deeply. The gaslighting aspect of Marcus's behavior, making victims doubt their own experiences, had been one of the most damaging parts of working under him. It wasn't just professional sabotage, it was psychological manipulation designed to break down confidence and resistance. Dr. Warren's research project suddenly felt more urgent. If we could identify the patterns that enabled people like Marcus to thrive in corporate environments, maybe we could help organizations recognize and address these issues before they destroy careers and lives. I called Dr. Warren that evening to accept her collaboration offer. I want to help make sure what happened to me and others doesn't keep happening to people in this industry. "Excellent," she replied. "I should mention that we've received funding from several major tech companies who want to improve their internal cultures. This isn't just academic research. We're developing practical tools that HR departments and managers can use to identify toxic behavior before it escalates." The project would involve interviewing dozens of people who'd experienced workplace psychological abuse, analyzing organizational structures that enabled such behavior, and creating evidence-based intervention strategies. It was ambitious work that could take years to complete, but it felt like a natural extension of the advocacy I'd been doing since winning the Innovation Award. 3 months later, Marcus was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $2.3 million in restitution to his victims. The judge's comments during sentencing were particularly pointed. Mr. Chen's crimes represent a betrayal of professional trust that goes far beyond financial fraud. He weaponized workplace hierarchies to exploit and manipulate colleagues for personal gain. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing, but several of Marcus's other victims did. They described feeling a sense of closure and validation that had been missing since their traumatic experiences with him. Meanwhile, Morrison Tech continued to flourish. We'd just signed our largest client ever, a national retail chain that wanted to implement our CRM platform across 500 locations. The project would require expanding our team by 40% and opening a new office in Denver. David and I had dinner that night to celebrate the new contract, but also to discuss a personal milestone. It was the 2-year anniversary of that night at the Fairmont Olympic, when our lives had collided in such an unexpected way. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Marcus hadn't fired you so publicly?" David asked, as we sat on the deck of his Bellevue home, watching the sunset over Lake Washington. "I think about it sometimes," I admitted. If he'd just quietly let me go, or if I'd found another job before things escalated, we might never have met. The acquisition might not have happened, and Morrison Tech could have failed. Your birth mother always believed that everything happens for a reason, David said, fingering the DNA pendant I've given him, a matching piece to the necklace Rachel had left for me. She used to say that even painful experiences could lead to unexpected gifts if we remained open to possibility. It was a comforting thought, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed in that level of cosmic planning. What I did know was that Marcus's attempt to destroy me had inadvertently created opportunities for growth, connection, and purpose that I never could have imagined. My phone buzzed with a notification from LinkedIn. Someone had shared my Innovation Awards speech again, this time with a comment from a young developer in Chicago. Watching this gave me the courage to report my toxic manager to HR. Update: he was fired today, and 3 other people came forward with similar stories. Thank you for showing that we don't have to accept this behavior. Stories like that arrived weekly now. People who'd been inspired to speak up, organizations that had implemented new policies, managers who'd reflected on their own behavior and made changes. The ripple effects of that terrible night at the Fairmont had somehow created positive change for hundreds of people I'd never met. As I prepared to head home to my own apartment, a spacious 1-bedroom in Capitol Hill that I'd bought with my director-level salary, I realized that the scared, humiliated woman who'd stood on that stage 18 months ago would be amazed by the life I was living now. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the Dr. Warren Research Project, the Denver office launch, and the ongoing work of building an inclusive, ethical workplace culture. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt truly equipped to handle whatever came next. 5 years after that humiliating night at the Fairmont Olympic, I stood in the green room of a TED Talk venue in Vancouver, adjusting the lapel microphone that would carry my voice to an audience of 2,000 people and millions more online. The irony was delicious. The woman who'd once been fired on stage was about to deliver one of the most important speeches of her career on that very same stage. Well, not literally the same stage, but close enough to feel symbolic. My presentation was titled "The Hidden Cost of Toxic Leadership: How One Public Humiliation Sparked a Movement." It would be the culmination of 3 years of research collaboration with Dr. Warren, whose Stanford study had become the definitive academic work on psychological safety in tech workplaces. Our research had influenced policy changes at over 200 companies and led to the development of early warning systems that could identify toxic management patterns before they destroyed careers. The research had also led to something I'd never expected: a book deal. Surviving the Stage, a blueprint for overcoming workplace trauma, had been published 6 months earlier and was already being used in business schools and corporate training programs across North America. The advance had been substantial enough for me to establish the Rachel Morrison Foundation, a nonprofit organization that provided legal and emotional support to workers experiencing psychological abuse in the workplace. But first, there was Morrison Tech's latest milestone to celebrate. That morning, David and I had signed the papers finalizing our acquisition of DataSync Corp., one of the competitors Marcus had once tried to sell our secrets to. The purchase made Morrison Tech the 3rd largest CRM platform provider on the West Coast, with over 800 employees and offices in 6 cities. "Miss Robinson, 5 minutes until showtime," announced the stage manager, an energetic woman in her 20s who reminded me of myself at that age, ambitious, hardworking, and probably dealing with her own workplace challenges. I took a deep breath and thought about all the people who'd reached out over the years to share their own stories of workplace abuse, career sabotage, and toxic leadership. There was Jessica from Portland, whose manager had taken credit for her innovative app design and then fired her when she complained. There was Kevin from Austin, who'd been systematically excluded from meetings and projects until he felt forced to quit. There was Maria from Denver, whose boss had spread rumors about her competence to justify passing her over for promotions. Their faces filled my mind as I walked onto the stage, each one representing thousands of other workers who'd suffered in silence under leaders who prioritized their own advancement over basic human decency. The TED stage was illuminated by warm spotlights, and the audience stretched back into comfortable darkness. I could see the familiar red circle beneath my feet, the same mark that had guided speakers for years as they shared ideas worth spreading.
5 years ago, I was fired on stage in front of 200 colleagues, clients, and industry leaders. I began, my voice steady and clear. My boss accused me of corporate espionage, questioned my competence, and tried to destroy my reputation in the most public way possible. He thought he was ending my career. Instead, he accidentally started a conversation that would change how we think about leadership, accountability, and justice in the workplace. I told the condensed version of my story, the systematic targeting, the false accusations, the humiliation, and the unexpected intervention by David. But I also shared what happened since: Marcus's criminal conviction, the dozens of other victims who'd come forward, and the research that had revealed how common these experiences were in corporate America. Here's what we learned, I continued, clicking a slide showing key statistics. 63% of workers have experienced some form of workplace psychological abuse. 41% have had their work stolen or credit taken by supervisors. And most shocking of all, 78% of these incidents go unreported because victims fear retaliation or believe nothing will change. The audience was completely silent, absorbing the magnitude of the problem. But here's the thing about toxic leaders like my former boss, I said, my voice gaining strength. They depend on isolation and silence to maintain their power. They count on victims feeling ashamed, questioning their own perceptions, and believing they're alone in their experiences. The moment we start talking to each other, their whole system falls apart. I shared some of the success stories from the Rachel Morrison Foundation, companies that had implemented our early warning protocols and prevented toxic situations from escalating, individuals who'd found the courage to speak up after reading about my experience, and entire industries that were beginning to prioritize psychological safety as a core business value. The research Dr. Warren and I conducted revealed something fascinating, I continued. Organizations that prioritize psychological safety don't just have happier employees, they're more innovative, more profitable, and more resilient during crises. It turns out that treating people with basic dignity isn't just the right thing to do, it's also good business. I clicked on a slide showing Morrison Tech's growth trajectory over the past 5 years. My current company has seen 340% revenue growth, 94% employee retention, and industry-leading innovation metrics. Not because we're smarter or more talented than our competitors, but because we've created an environment where people feel safe to take risks, challenge assumptions, and admit when they don't know something. The presentation moved into the practical portion, specific strategies that individuals and organizations could implement immediately. I talked about the importance of documenting incidents, building supportive colleague networks, and understanding legal protections. For leaders, I outlined early warning signs of toxic behavior and evidence-based intervention strategies. But the most important thing I want you to remember, I said, approaching the climax of my talk, is that if you're currently experiencing workplace abuse, it's not your fault, you're not imagining it, and you're not alone. There are people who will believe you, systems to protect you, and resources to help you rebuild.
I paused, looking out at the audience where I could see people wiping away tears and nodding in recognition. 5 years ago, a man tried to destroy my career because he felt threatened by my competence and integrity. He chose the most humiliating method possible, thinking that public shame would silence me forever. He was wrong. That moment of humiliation became the foundation for everything meaningful I've accomplished since. I clicked to the final slide, which showed a photo of the Rachel Morrison Foundation's latest achievement, a new workplace advocacy center in downtown Seattle that provided free legal consultations, counseling services, and career transition support for abuse survivors. Your worst moment doesn't have to define you, I concluded. Sometimes it can be the catalyst that helps you discover who you're truly meant to become. Thank you. The applause was thunderous and sustained. As I walked off stage, I felt a profound sense of completion, not just of the presentation, but of a journey that had begun with humiliation and led to purpose. In the green room afterward, David was waiting with a huge smile and tears in his eyes. "Rachel would have been so proud," he said, wrapping me in a hug. "You've turned her memory into a force for good in the world." Sarah Martinez, now Chief Innovation Officer at Morrison Tech, appeared beside us with her phone in hand. "Luna, you need to see this. Your talk is already trending on social media, and the Foundation's website has received over 10,000 new contacts in the past hour."
My phone was buzzing with messages from colleagues, friends, and strangers who'd watched the livestream, but the one that meant the most came from Jenny Nakamura, Marcus's former victim who'd become a close friend and fellow advocate. Watching from Tokyo, you did it, Luna. You really did it. Can't wait to implement these strategies with my new team here. As we left the venue and stepped into the cool Vancouver evening, I thought about the scared, isolated woman who'd stood on that stage 5 years ago, convinced her career was over. She'd had no idea that her moment of greatest vulnerability would become the source of her greatest strength. Marcus Chen was scheduled for release from federal prison in 18 months. I wondered sometimes if he'd learned anything from his downfall, if he understood the ripple effects his cruelty had created. But mostly, I hoped he'd find a way to contribute positively to the world rather than continuing to harm others. Because that, ultimately, was what this journey had taught me. We all have a choice in how we respond to power, how we treat the people who depend on us, and how we define success. Some people choose to lift others up, while others choose to tear them down. I knew which kind of leader I wanted to be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The foundation was expanding internationally, Morrison Tech was exploring AI integration for our platforms, and Dr. Warren and I were beginning work on a follow-up study about recovery and resilience. But tonight, walking through the streets of Vancouver with my father and my closest colleague, I felt grateful from every twist and turn that had brought me to this moment. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting even, it's building something so meaningful and positive that your opponent's cruelty becomes irrelevant. Sometimes, the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy, but transforming yourself into someone they could never touch. 5 years ago, Marcus Chen tried to end my story. Instead, he helped me discover that it was just beginning. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.